My name is Corey. I am 46 years old. For 15 years, I ran a small but successful construction company specializing in custom homes and renovations. Before that, I served 8 years in the United States Army, 10th Mountain Division. I've been to places and seen things that most people only watch in movies. I know how to handle myself. I know how to assess a threat, how to keep calm under pressure, and how to use a weapon. I am not a man prone to hysterics or imagination. What I know is tangible, what I can see and touch. Or at least, that's who I used to be. Every October, without fail, my family and I would spend a week in the Great Smoky Mountains. It was our tradition, a reset button before the holiday season swallowed us whole. My wife Alyssa loved the crisp autumn air. My son Brian, who was 14 at the time, pretended to hate it, but secretly loved the chance to be away from school. And my daughter Megan, 10 years old, just loved being in the woods.
We always rented the same place, a 2-bedroom log cabin nestled deep in a holler, miles from the main parkway, at the absolute end of a winding gravel road. It was isolated, quiet, and perfect. I taught my kids about the outdoors since they could walk. Not just the pretty parts, but the practical, sometimes harsh realities of it. They knew how to read a compass, how to identify poison ivy and copperheads, and what to do if they encountered a black bear. I believed in preparedness. I believed that knowledge stripped the wild of its teeth, rendering it manageable. I thought that if you respected the rules of nature, it would, in turn, respect you. I was wrong. The world has rules, but they are not the ones I thought I knew. Our last trip began like any other. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon, the air smelling of wood smoke and damp leaves. The cabin was just as we'd left it the year before, a comforting constant in our lives.
Brian immediately started complaining about the lack of cell service, a ritual that had become part of the tradition itself. Megan was already on the porch, trying to coax a chipmunk closer with a piece of a cracker. Alyssa stood beside me, breathing in the mountain air with a contented sigh. It was a perfect picture of normalcy, a baseline of peace that I now look back on like a scene from someone else's life. It was the last time any of us would feel truly safe. The first day passed in a comfortable blur of hiking and unpacking. We took a familiar trail to a small waterfall, and I pointed out the same landmarks I always did. We returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, tired and happy. As dusk began to settle, I built a fire in the outdoor pit. This was my favorite part of the day, the sun dipping below the ridgeline, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the first stars appearing in the deepening twilight. The kids were roasting marshmallows, their faces lit by the flickering flames. And then came the first wrong thing. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a lack of it. One moment, the woods were alive with the evening chorus, the thrum of crickets, the chirping of tree frogs, the distant call of a whippoorwill. The next, there was absolute silence. It wasn't a gradual fading. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. The air became heavy, dead. Even the crackle of our fire seemed muffled. Megan noticed it first. "Daddy, why did the bugs stop singing?" she asked, her voice small in the sudden stillness. I didn't have an answer. I scanned the dark tree line surrounding our small clearing. An unnatural quiet in the woods usually means one thing. A predator is moving. A large one. "Probably a bear wandering nearby," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "They get spooked and everything goes quiet for a bit. It's normal." But it didn't feel normal. The silence was too profound, too complete. It felt watchful. Brian, ever the teenager, made a joke. "Or maybe it's Bigfoot. He's come for our marshmallows." Alyssa shot him a look, and I told him to knock it off. The joke fell flat, absorbed by the oppressive quiet. We sat there for another 10 minutes, the silence stretching our nerves thin. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the insect chorus started up again, hesitant at first, then swelling back to its normal volume. The moment passed, but a seed of unease had been planted. I tried to rationalize it, to file it away under unusual but explainable, but a part of my brain, the part honed by years of paying attention to my surroundings, refused to let it go. Later that night, long after the kids and Alyssa were asleep, I was sitting on the porch, nursing a lukewarm coffee and listening to the sounds of the forest. That's when I heard it. It was distant, coming from the direction of the steep ridge behind the cabin.
It was a grating, scraping sound, deep and guttural. It sounded like a colossal stone being dragged across a bed of rock, but there was an organic, wet quality to it that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was rhythmic, a slow, deliberate scrape. Pause. Scrape. My mind raced through the possibilities. Bear? No bear I'd ever heard made a sound like that. A landslide? No, it was too regular, too patterned. I thought of Brian's stupid joke and felt a flicker of irrational anger. I was a practical man. There was a logical explanation for everything. I just didn't know what it was yet. The sound continued for about a minute, then stopped, leaving only the familiar night sounds behind. I finished my coffee, locked the cabin door, something I rarely bothered with, and went to bed, telling myself it was nothing. But sleep didn't come easily. The next day, I suggested we try a different trail, one that led up the ridge where I'd heard the sound. I told Alyssa I wanted to see the view from the top. The truth was, I needed to see what had made that noise. I needed an explanation to put my mind at ease. We packed a light lunch and set off. The trail was less maintained than the one we'd taken the day before, overgrown in places. After about an hour of steady climbing, Brian, who was a few yards ahead, called out, "Whoa, Dad, you gotta see this." I pushed past a curtain of rhododendron leaves and saw him standing at the edge of a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a deer, or what was left of one. I've seen my share of animal kills in the wild. I know what a bear does to a carcass, how coyotes and bobcats feed. This was not that. The deer, a large doe, was torn in half, not bitten or clawed apart in a frenzy, but ripped apart at the torso with what must have been incredible force. The spine was snapped, the two halves of the animal lying a few feet from each other. The rib cage on the upper half was splayed open, the ribs bent outwards at impossible angles, as if something had pried it open to get at the organs. Scavengers had been at it, but the initial kill, the sheer brutal strength required to do that, was staggering. "What did this?" Alyssa asked, her hand flying to her mouth. Megan buried her face in my wife's side, whimpering. I crouched down, examining the ground around the kill. There were tracks, but they were muddled and indistinct in the leaf litter. What I could see didn't make sense. Some looked vaguely canine, but they were huge, far larger than any wolf. Others were just deep, formless impressions in the dirt. I stood up, my mind a blank wall of disbelief. "A bear," I said, the words tasting like a lie. "A very, very big bear." But a bear wouldn't do this. A bear would crush the skull or break the neck. It would drag the carcass away to feed. It wouldn't tear a 200-pound animal in half like it was made of paper.
My training, the voice in the back of my head that analyzed threats, was no longer whispering. It was screaming. This was wrong. All of it. "We're going back," I announced, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Now." The hike back to the cabin was silent. The fun was gone, replaced by a heavy, unspoken dread. The peaceful woods no longer felt welcoming. They felt alien and menacing. I kept scanning the trees, my hand resting on the butt of the holstered pistol I wore on my hip whenever we were in the backcountry. For the first time in my life, I felt like prey. That evening, the atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension. The kids were subdued, staying inside instead of playing on the porch. Alyssa kept glancing nervously out the windows, which were now dark mirrors reflecting the lamp-lit room. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, cooking dinner and talking about mundane things, but my heart wasn't in it. Every creak of the old cabin made me jump. After dinner, as I was washing dishes, we heard it. Heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. It wasn't the light tread of a raccoon or the clumsy shuffle of a bear. These were heavy, deliberate steps. The cadence was all wrong for a person. It was a slow, two-beat rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Like a very large man trying to walk quietly and failing. I froze, the plate slipping from my soapy hands and clattering into the sink. Brian's eyes went wide. Alyssa grabbed Megan and pulled her close. I put a finger to my lips, signaling for silence, and crept towards the front door. The footsteps stopped right in front of it. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. We stood there, frozen, barely breathing. Then, the doorknob began to jiggle. It wasn't a frantic rattling. It was a slow, methodical turning, first one way, then the other. Testing it. My blood turned to ice. No animal does that. A bear might claw at a door or push against it, but it wouldn't try to work the knob. This was intelligent. This was something trying to get in. My army training slammed into the forefront of my mind. Threat, secure, protect. I unholstered my Sig Sauer, the familiar weight a small comfort in the face of the unbelievable. I flicked off the safety with my thumb. I turned to my family, my face a mask of calm I did not feel. "Alyssa," I whispered, my voice tight. "Take the kids, go into the back bedroom, lock the door and don't make a sound." She nodded, her face pale with terror, and herded the children out of the main room. I heard the click of the bedroom door locking behind them. I was alone in the living room, facing the front door. I flattened myself against the wall beside it, pistol held in a two-handed grip, aimed at the center of the door. The jiggling stopped. A new sound began, a low, wet sniffing sound right at the bottom of the door. It was loud, powerful. I could almost feel the air moving. A deep, guttural breath followed, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and up my legs. It knew we were here. It was smelling us. It was hunting us. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I was locked in a standoff with an unseen, unknown entity. My tactical brain was running scenarios, but every one of them ended with a question mark. What was I fighting? How big was it? How many were there? The rational part of me was at war with what my senses were telling me. Finally, the sniffing stopped. I heard the heavy footsteps again, moving away from the door and off the porch. I waited, counting to 60 in my head. Nothing. I had to know what was out there. I had to see it. It was a stupid risk, a violation of every tactical principle, but I couldn't just stand there in ignorance. The front door had a small, rectangular pane of glass set at eye level. I crept towards it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I took a deep breath and risked a quick look. The moon was nearly full, bathing the clearing in a pale, silvery light. At first I saw nothing but the familiar trees. Then, at the edge of the woods, where the porch light didn't quite reach, a shape detached itself from the shadows. It was standing on two legs. It was huge, easily 1.5 feet taller than me, and broad, with shoulders that seemed impossibly wide. It was dark, a silhouette against the slightly less dark forest behind it. It stood there for a moment, perfectly still, as if listening.
Then it turned its head, looking back towards the deep woods, and I saw its profile against the moonlight. The profile was not human. It was long, with a distinct snout. Pointed ears stood erect on top of its head. It was the head of a wolf, or a massive dog, perched atop a hulking, bipedal frame. I stumbled back from the door, a gasp escaping my lips. My mind refused to process what I had just seen. It was a monster from a child's nightmare, a creature that had no right to exist.
Bear. The word echoed in my head, a desperate, pathetic attempt at rationalization.
That was not a bear. A new sound started, confirming the impossibility of it all. A low, scraping noise, moving along the side of the cabin. The sound of claws, thick and hard, being dragged against the log walls. It was circling the building, testing the perimeter. My small wooden fortress suddenly felt as fragile as a house of cards. Then came the knocking. It wasn't the frantic scrabbling of an animal, it was deliberate. 3 distinct taps on the wall, just to the left of the window. Tap, tap, tap. A pause of about 10 seconds, and then the same 3 taps on the back wall of the cabin. It was moving around us, signaling its presence. It was a psychological attack, designed to terrorize, to break us down. It knew we were inside, and it was telling us there was no escape.
I stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, tracking the sound as it moved around our prison, my pistol feeling like a child's toy in my hands. The rhythmic knocking continued for what felt like an hour, a torturous, nerve-shredding drumbeat, counting down to some unknown horror. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The silence that descended was somehow more terrifying. The waiting was a unique form of agony. Every creak of the cabin settling, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I stayed on my feet, moving between the windows, trying to pierce the oppressive darkness. My family was huddled in the back room, their silent terror a palpable presence that seeped through the closed door. Suddenly the night exploded. An ear-splitting crash of shattering glass erupted from the main living area. It wasn't the sound of a rock being thrown. It was the percussive impact of pure kinetic force. Something had just punched its way through the double-paned window next to the fireplace.
Before the last shards of glass had even hit the floor, a long, dark limb reached through the jagged opening. It was grotesquely muscled, covered in coarse black fur, matted with something wet. The arm ended in a hand that was a nightmarish parody of a human's. It had a palm, fingers, and an opposable thumb, but the skin was like thick black leather, and each finger terminated in a long, yellowed, wickedly curved claw. The hand fumbled blindly for a moment before its claws found the window lock. "Stay in the room, don't come out!" I screamed towards the back bedroom, my voice cracking. I raised my pistol, the sights shaking in my hands as I leveled it at the intruding arm. The creature was methodical. With a sickening click, it flipped the lock. Then, with a screech of tortured metal, it began to slide the window open. I backed away, putting the heavy oak coffee table between me and the window.
I had to see it. I had to know what I was facing.
The thing began to pull its massive frame through the opening. It ducked its head to clear the frame, and then it was inside. The reality of it was a physical blow. It was bipedal, standing on 2 powerful legs that bent backwards like a dog's. Its feet were huge paws, the claws digging into the hardwood floor. It straightened up to its full height, and I had to crane my neck to look at its head. It was easily 8 feet tall. Its torso was a slab of muscle, disproportionately thick and powerful, tapering to a narrow waist. But the arms were wrong. They were too long, hanging down almost to its knees, the clawed hands flexing and unflexing. The head was purely, undeniably canine. It was like the head of a monstrous timber wolf had been grafted onto the body of a giant. The fur was dark, almost black, and patchy in places, revealing glimpses of gray, leathery skin beneath. And the eyes were not animal.
They were a flat, pale yellow, glowing with a malevolent intelligence that was utterly chilling. It looked at me, and I knew it was not just a beast driven by instinct. It was a thinking, reasoning predator. It opened its long snout, revealing rows of yellow, dagger-like teeth, and a sound ripped from its throat. It was a guttural snarl that merged into a deep, vibrating growl, a sound of pure hatred that shook the very air in the room. Then it moved. It didn't run. It loped forward with a terrifying, unnatural gait, covering the distance between the window and me in 2 long strides. My training took over. I didn't think. I reacted. Center mass. I squeezed the trigger. Pop, pop, pop. The 9mm round struck it in the chest. I saw the impacts, dark spots blossoming on its fur. It grunted, stumbling back a step, more from surprise than pain. It roared, a sound of fury and agony combined, and looked down at its chest, then back at me. It wasn't down. It wasn't even slowed. It lunged again, this time with incredible speed. I threw myself sideways, diving over the coffee table as it crashed into the wall where I had been standing. The impact was like a car hitting the cabin. The log wall groaned, and wood paneling splintered and flew through the air. This thing was impossibly strong. I scrambled to my feet, my mind reeling. It was smart. It had seen the pistol. It knew I was the threat. Instead of charging me directly again, it spun around, its movements shockingly fluid for something so large. It grabbed the heavy, upholstered armchair that sat by the fireplace, lifted it as if it weighed nothing, and hurled it at me. I dropped and rolled as the chair cartwheeled through the air, smashing into the kitchen counter behind me with a deafening crunch of splintering wood. The cabin was being systematically destroyed. This wasn't just an attack, it was a demolition. It was a whirlwind of rage and violence, a force of nature unleashed in our tiny sanctuary. I kept firing, backing away towards the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I had to keep it focused on me. I had to protect my family. It swiped at me as I moved, its long arm a black blur. I tried to pull back, but the tips of its claws raked across my left forearm. The pain was immediate and searing, a white-hot fire that shot up to my shoulder. I cried out, stumbling back, clutching my arm. Blood, dark and hot, soaked my sleeve. I was cornered in the hallway. My arm was on fire, and a quick glance told me the wound was deep. I could feel the slide lock back on my pistol. Empty. I was down to my last magazine. The creature stood in the center of the wrecked living room, breathing heavily, its chest rising and falling. Black, viscous blood was dripping from the bullet wounds on its chest onto the floor, but the bleeding seemed sluggish, minimal. It turned its head and looked down the hallway, past me, towards the closed bedroom door. A new kind of terror, cold and absolute, washed over me. It knew. It knew they were back there. It took a step towards the hallway, its yellow eyes fixed on that door. A surge of pure, primal adrenaline flooded my system, overriding the pain in my arm. My family, my wife, my children, not them, never them. I dropped the empty magazine, my hand shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled for the spare on my belt. The creature started forward, its loping gait eating up the floor space. I slammed the new magazine home, chambered around. No more center mass. It wasn't working. It had to be the head. It was my last chance. It was almost on me. I brought the pistol up, ignoring the screaming pain in my other arm. I took a fraction of a second to aim, the front sight wavering over its monstrous face. It was 5 feet away,
I could smell its breath, a rank odor of rot and old blood. I fired twice. The first shot went wide, punching a hole in the wall behind it.
The second shot struck it square on the bridge of its long snout. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. The creature stopped dead. It threw its head back and let out a sound that was nothing like the growls and roars from before. It was a high-pitched, unearthly scream of pure, unadulterated agony. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world. It staggered back, its clawed hands flying up to clutch its face. Dark, thick blood, almost black in the dim light, gushed between its fingers. It shrieked again, a sound of nails on a chalkboard amplified 1,000 times, and stumbled blindly backwards. It crashed into the wall, then turned and scrambled, half falling, half crawling, back through the shattered window it had entered. It disappeared into the darkness outside with a final, choked-off cry. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the dripping of my blood onto the floor. Then, from the woods, just off the porch, came a cacophony of thrashing and roaring, the sounds of a large body in immense pain, crashing through the underbrush. "Now!" the word tore from my throat. "Get out! We're leaving now, to the truck." The bedroom door flew open. Alyssa was there, her face a mess of tears and terror. Brian was right behind her, practically carrying Megan, who was limp with fear, her face buried in his shoulder. There was no time to think, no time to grab anything. We were a single entity, a panicked organism fleeing for its life. We scrambled out of the ruined cabin and onto the porch. The air was cold, and the sounds of the wounded creature were terrifyingly close, just beyond the circle of the porch light. I shoved my family towards the steps, towards my Ford F-150 parked 20 yards away. My keys. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers slick with my own blood, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grasp them. We reached the truck. Alyssa threw the back door open and pushed the kids inside. I jammed the key into the ignition. It wouldn't turn. For one heart-stopping second, I thought it was over. Then I realized I'd put it in upside down. I flipped it, twisted, and the engine roared to life. I have never heard a more beautiful sound. I slammed the gear shift into reverse and stomped on the accelerator. The tires spun, spraying gravel everywhere. The truck lurched backwards. As the headlights swung in a wide arc across the clearing, they illuminated it. The creature. It was on all fours now, a low, monstrous quadruped, its unnaturally long forelimbs giving it a grotesque, hyena-like posture. It was moving with a horrifying, bounding speed, keeping pace with the truck as I backed down the short driveway. Its head was still low, but its yellow eyes were fixed on us, glowing in the beams. I wrenched the wheel, swinging the front of the truck around onto the gravel road. I floored it. The F-150 fishtailed wildly on the loose surface, the rear end threatening to slide out from under us. I fought the wheel, my entire being focused on one thing: speed. In the rearview mirror, I saw it emerge from the driveway and onto the road behind us. It was running, bounding on all fours with an incredible, unnatural speed. It was a huge, dark shape, a nightmare-given form, relentlessly pacing us down the narrow road. The woods pressed in on both sides, a tunnel of darkness. Every time the road straightened for a few yards, I could see it back there, a persistent shadow in the moonlight, its form silhouetted against the dust cloud kicked up by my tires. It wasn't giving up. The chase felt like an eternity. The gravel road seemed to stretch on forever, a ribbon of terror. I pushed the truck harder than I ever had, the suspension groaning, the engine screaming. I didn't dare look at my family. I could hear Megan sobbing in the back, a raw, desperate sound. Finally, I saw the glint of reflectors, the paved county road,
We shot off the gravel and onto the asphalt with a bone-jarring lurch. I didn't slow down. I pushed the truck to 80, then 90 miles an hour. I glanced in the mirror. For a moment, I saw the creature at the edge of the woods where the gravel road met the pavement, a tall, dark figure standing on two legs again, watching us go. Then we rounded a curve, and it was gone. We didn't stop. We didn't speak. I just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my bloody arm throbbing in time with my heart. We drove for 30 miles before we saw the lights of a town. I didn't pull over until I saw the blue and white sign for a hospital. Only then did I allow myself to believe we might have actually escaped. Inside the emergency room, the fluorescent lights were brutally bright. A nurse took one look at my arm and rushed me into a treatment room. It took 24 stitches to close the gashes.
A sheriff's deputy arrived while the doctor was still working on me. He was young, with a clipboard and an air of professional boredom. I told him everything. I tried to be calm, to be the credible witness I knew I needed to be. I recounted the events factually, chronologically, just as I'm telling them now. I described the silence in the woods, the tracks, the deer carcass. I described the sounds on the porch, the jiggling doorknob. And then I described the creature. I described its size, its shape, its canine head, its intelligent eyes. He listened, taking notes, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he clicked his pen and looked at me. "Mister," he began, his voice flat, "had you or your wife been drinking this evening?" The question was a slap in the face. I told him no. He nodded slowly. "Okay, so a bear broke into your cabin." "That was not a bear," I said, my voice rising. "A bear does not turn a doorknob. A bear does not throw furniture. Did you hear what I said?" "I hear you," he said, his tone placating, the kind you use on a drunk or a crazy person. "You've been through a traumatic experience, an animal attack. It's common for the mind to fill in the blanks, to make things seem more than they were." He wrote something on his clipboard. "We'll file a report. Animal attack. Probable black bear breaking in for food. We'll have a ranger go up and check on the cabin in the morning." And that was it. Case closed. My reality, the horror that had nearly destroyed my family, was dismissed as a trauma-induced fantasy. I was left with my stitches, my wrecked family, and a truth no one would ever believe. We didn't go back to the cabin. We couldn't. We drove home the next day in silence, the four of us trapped in a bubble of shared trauma. I thought it was over. I thought we had escaped. The true horror, I would soon learn, was just beginning. It had followed us home. Our house was on a quiet cul-de-sac, but it backed up onto a large, undeveloped tract of woodland. It had always been a selling point for us. Privacy, a slice of nature. Now, it was a source of constant dread. 3 nights after we got back, our golden retriever, Gus, started going insane. He stood at the back patio door, the fur on his spine raised, barking and growling at the dark woods beyond our yard. He'd never done that before. The next morning, I went out to look. The ground near the tree line was soft from a recent rain. And there they were. Tracks. 2 of them, deep in the mud. They were huge, vaguely canine, with 4 distinct toes and a heavy pad. But they weren't the prints of a 4-legged animal. The pressure was all wrong. They were the prints of something that had walked there on 2 legs. 1 print, then another 3 feet in front of it. A bipedal stride. My blood ran cold. It had found us. It knew where we lived. That night it started again. The knocking. Faint but unmistakable. On the far side of the house, the wall of our master bedroom. Tap, tap, tap.
A long pause. Tap, tap, tap. It was here. It was outside our home. It was reminding us. I called the sheriff's department again, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. I told them something was prowling around my house. They sent a deputy. He was older than the first one, with tired eyes. He walked the perimeter of my property with a flashlight, his boots sinking into the damp lawn. He found nothing. No tracks. I had obliterated the ones I found in my panicked rush to check them. No broken branches. Nothing. As he was getting back into his patrol car, he paused and looked at me. "You're the family from that bear incident up at Chestnut Ridge, aren't you?" I nodded numbly. He sighed and leaned against his car door, lowering his voice. "Listen to me," he said, not looking at me, but at the dark woods behind my house. "My granddad was a logger up in these mountains his whole life. He used to tell stories, things you don't talk about in the light of day, things you don't go looking for. He said there are some places, some things, that are just wrong." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes dark with something I couldn't name. Fear? Resignation? "My advice to you? Move. Sell this house and move somewhere with streetlights. And don't call us about this again. There's nothing we can do." He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in my driveway, enveloped by a silence that was more terrifying than any sound. He believed me, and he was telling me we were on our own. We sold the house 2 weeks later, at a loss. We didn't care. We packed our lives into boxes and moved. We live in a suburb now, a sprawling development of identical houses, where the lots are so small you can hear your neighbor sneeze. There are no woods. There are no dark places. There are only streetlights that cast a sterile, orange glow all night long, and the constant, reassuring hum of traffic on a nearby freeway. I don't run my own business anymore. I couldn't. I couldn't stand being on job sites, often at the edge of new developments, bordering on forests. I work a desk job now, in a climate-controlled office building in the middle of the city. I process insurance claims. It's soul-crushing, monotonous work. It's perfect. But you don't escape something like this. You just carry it. My family is a ghost of what it once was. Alyssa suffers from severe anxiety and rarely leaves the house. Megan, my sweet, brave girl, has night terrors. She wakes up screaming, but she can never remember the dream. I think it's a blessing that she can't. Brian is the one I worry about most.
He's 17 now, but he's a hollowed-out version of the boy he was. He's quiet, withdrawn. He saw its face when we scrambled out of the cabin. He saw its eyes. He carries that image with him every day. We never talk about what happened. We can't. The words don't exist. How do you discuss the impossible reality that shattered your world? You just live in the ruins. I'm a prisoner of what I know. I look at people going about their lives, secure in their belief that the world is a rational, understandable place, and I feel a profound sense of isolation. They have no idea. They have no idea what lies just beyond the thin veil of their reality, what watches from the dark spaces on the map. They live in a world of rules and reasons. I live in a world where monsters are real. So why am I telling this story? I don't know. Not for sympathy, not for belief. The deputy's disbelief was easier to handle than his quiet, terrified acceptance. Maybe I'm telling it as a warning. Maybe it's a memorial for the family I lost, even though we all survived. If you take anything from this, take this. The world is not what you think it is. The wild places are older and deeper than our understanding.
So if you are ever out there, deep in the woods, and the world suddenly goes unnaturally quiet, listen. If you hear footsteps that don't sound right, or a sound that your brain can't classify, do not try to rationalize it. Do not try to be brave. Do not investigate. Turn around, get in your car, lock your doors, and drive away. Don't look back. Pray that whatever it is lets you go. Pray that it doesn't get your scent. Pray that it doesn't follow you home. Some things are not meant to be confronted. They are only meant to be survived. We survived, but what's left of us isn't living. It's just a memory of what we used to be.